Welcome to the Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Dean, who chairs the meeting. I'd just like to draw your attention to one or two short notices. Filming. Members of the public are welcome to film proceedings as long as these are not disruptive to the conduct of the meeting. We'll also be filming webcasting the meeting for you and advising to sit in the public gallery if you do not wish for your image to be captured. We are not expecting a fire drill, so please be aware that in the event of an alarm sounding, we will leave by the fire exit doors located near the podium. That's over there and where you came in. Can I remind anybody, everyone, please, that this is a meeting in the public and not a public meeting, which means that only committee members and people who have previously registered to speak can speak. Comments from the audience which disrupt the meeting will not be allowed. Can I ask that mobile phones be turned off and please avoid interference with the recording equipment? Thank you. Right, if we could possibly carry on with the meeting. I'm just, because of the number of people that are attending, going to take two items out of order. The first item, when we get to it, when we get to the planning applications, will be the Donkey Stones Brewing application, and the second item will be the Christchurch one. So, if we can start from the top of the agenda, please, and could I ask for apologies?
Chair, we've had no apologies tonight.
Thank you. I've not been notified of any urgent business.
None received, Chair.
Chair,
Yeah.
just need to be clear, it's all nations first, not Donkey Stone.
No, we're all right now.
Oh, we all right?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Declarations of interest. Yes, Councillor. You.
Before I was a councillor, I shared a petition on how to on how to people can show their support for the 9% Brewery application. So I'm going to that was on the previous application, not this one. So I don't know what the group solicitors advice on that is.
Well, Chair, it's a matter for the individual member as to whether they think they've should be whether that interest is a prejudicial one. If you wanted my advice, I would suggest that it isn't. Yeah, but obviously it needs to be declared. Yeah.
Okay. So you've declared that interest. Right. Public question time. I don't think we've received any.
None received, Chair.
So there's none received. Minutes of the previous meeting, which I'll move as a correct record. Would somebody second that? Has anybody got any observations on them? No, thank you. Right, if we can then come to the first application, which we're taking out of order, which is the Donkey Stones Brewing Company. And if I could ask the planning officers to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. This is a site and a proposal which members have previously considered back in the summer, and on that occasion the application was refused. However, there have been a number of changes to the application since that time, and I'll explain those as we go along. So this relates to a couple of adjoining units within an industrial estate in an area that has a primarily residential character, but with existing industrial and commercial premises on this site and on an adjoining site to the southwest as well. So this is just showing you the particular area. So as I say, this is the main site itself, and then there is other industrial premises on this part of the site. The application relates to this end of the building, so it's within the access as you come off Bowshurst Lane into the shared site area, and a couple of units within the site itself. So this is giving you that close up. So as I say, access through. There's effectively a shared communal parking area and designated areas outside the units for parking by the business itself. The business, you'll be aware, is a small brewery. It's been established on the site, and the proposal is to introduce effectively a brewery tap within that building, with various restrictions which you'll see in your report that we're now looking to impose. Clearly, this was a retrospective application. The use had already commenced prior to the previous meeting. However, following that decision, it's my understanding that there has been no activity from the brewery tap, pending obviously the outcome of committee's reconsideration. So these are the two units that, these are the two units that are linked through, and the brewery tap element will be within this part of the site. So again, difficult, unfortunately, to see. This is what you were looking at from as you come in from the communal area. So there's two various entrances into the unit. This entrance on the right hand side will be the one where the public would gain access into the unit. Effectively, then this area of the site is the public area, with obviously toilet facilities and the bar area. The brewery itself, with its storage area and the brewing operations, will be in this adjoining part of the site. You'll see that into the public area there is a fire escape door at the back of the site. There will be restrictions that we're suggesting are imposed on that to make sure that members of the public are not able to use that, or to use the outside areas of the site during the operation of the business. These are some photographs that were taken actually a little while back, which show you the furnishings inside the brewery. So again, you've got the bar area, and on this area generally is taken over by the public drinking parts of the site itself. Just going outside, so again, just to try to give that description, this is the entrance door area where the public would gain access into the premises. As you can see, that the building itself to an adjoining premise comes slightly forward, so there's a kind of alcove area that's created as a result of that. Whoops. It's just a close-up version again of the access door. Now, these are a couple of views which give you a wider perspective of the site. So what we've just been looking at is just off the pictures to the right hand side, and then we're looking towards the site entrance as you head towards Boarshurst Lane. But as you can see, there's a wider area within the centre of the site which is shared by other businesses on the business park. This time looking in the opposite direction, so we're looking roughly towards Kinders Lane to the north of the site. This is the area just on the left hand side where that vehicle is parked, which is the entrance area to the site. Just going a bit further across, so this is right at that top boundary of the site. There should be no reason why any of the customers who are coming into the site really need to be at this area of the site. There'll be no access round the back of the building. As I say, you saw where the entrance area was. Clearly at night there may well be, at quiet periods there may well be areas where people could park on there, but certainly no activity associated with the proposal should take place in that part of the site. This is just showing you around the back area of the site. Now this does adjoin onto some residential gardens, so obviously it's quite a sensitive area, and it's precisely for that reason that we would be suggesting that members place restrictions to ensure there is no activity in this part of the site. So essentially it's a part retrospective in the sense that as you can see from the photographs, the building has already been set up for the bar area. Members will be aware from the previous meeting and from the report that there have been various complaints about the previous activity, and in particular activity in the late hours, and also the fact that there are various events that had been run on those occasions, which include having live bands on in the premises, and also in fact having snack vehicles at various events in the yard area. What we're suggesting we do in this particular instance is restrict the amount of activity that can take place effectively to what you might term the working day times. So obviously this is a business park, it's well established. You're clearly going to get some activity taking place in any case during those times. Some of that could include, you know, businesses could have the door open, it could include music being played and so forth, but certainly general activity will take place. As a result, we're satisfied that this activity could operate within that area without having any detrimental impact on neighbouring residents in the locality. There have been various, and I think it's raised by some of the objections, various previous applications on the site. Unfortunately, our records are not complete on that, but what is quite clear is that restrictions were placed either in terms of hours of operation or in terms of noise limitation levels on the activity in the site. But in the instances of the two applications, which are relevant applications listed in your report, the hours that we're suggesting, which is effectively 11 o'clock in the morning through to 6 o'clock in the evening on Monday to Saturday, accord generally with those restrictions that had been previously placed on the site. I would add from that, and you'll see in the way that the conditions worded, the idea is that it finishes at 6, and that doesn't mean that the bar stops serving at 6. That means that all customers should be out of the premises by that period of time. We're also recommending condition in relation to maximum noise limitations that could come from the site, particularly from any music that might be played within the business. Again, given that this is daytime activity, the ambient noise levels in the area will obviously be much higher than they were on the previous proposal into the evening. As previously mentioned, there'll be restrictions on access to the rear of the premises, and also tied in really with licensing regulations that there should be no drinking outside the building itself. What we obviously can't do is stop people coming and going, and we can't stop people going out for a smoke if they want to. But as I say, given that that level of activity already would take place on the industrial estate, it's not deemed that that would cause any significant problems in the area. So I think realistically we've taken the concerns that obviously members of the public had at previous application, and also that members had in making their previous decision. We also note that although there have been a lot of objections to the application, there have been a lot of letters of support for this local business as well that have been received, and again that's detailed in the members' report. So we recommend that committee support the application subject to all those conditions. Thank you, Chair.
At this stage, has any members got any questions to the report? Right. If not, if I could ask Mr. Hourigan, is it to address the...
Object.
Sorry, the objector, which is Mrs. Sheila Wright. Yeah, if you'd like to come. Mr. Wright, you have 3 minutes to address the committee. We'll let you know near the time if you reach that time when it's up. Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and members. My name is Sheila Wright. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and Director of Pegasus Planning Group. I act on behalf of a group of Greenfield residents who live close to the application site and who strenuously object to the application. As a committee, you rightly recognise the harmful nature of the previous application to open a public bar in the applicant's premises when you refused the application on the 17th of July. In making that decision, you had the benefit of knowing exactly what the harmful effects of approval would be, because they had actually occurred for many months when the public bar operated unlawfully. Recorded evidence of this is held by the council. Turning to the current application, the applicant will no doubt tell you that this one is materially different from the one refused in July. In fact, it's not. All the applicant has done is to cut back their proposed opening hours, mainly sacrificing opening on weekdays and slightly paring back weekend and bank holiday opening. On Fridays, they are actually proposing extending the overall opening hours. Assurances regarding the level of background noise music in this application are the same assurances given in the 2017 premises licence application, which were broken. No sound insulation scheme is being proposed. Miller Goodall's acoustic report demonstrates the harmful impact of no physical works to the building. The EHO has recognised this in the officer's report. Fundamentally, the application still involves an inappropriate use being introduced into the middle of a quiet residential neighbourhood. Your officers can see this, so they are seeking via a condition to further reduce the hours of operation. Residents welcome the officer's recognition that there should be no business activity after 6, as this safeguard of residential amenity has been firmly established through planning conditions consistently imposed on planning permissions granted over 2 decades. However, something which is unacceptable on a Sunday afternoon is equally unacceptable on a Saturday afternoon. Essentially, the current recommendations would condemn residents to a 50% blight on their weekends in perpetuity, and extensions would no doubt be sought. It's also no safeguard to say that the use would cease if the brewery use ended. There would be many ways to circumvent this. In conclusion, contrary to what has been suggested in social media and elsewhere, there is no vendetta against Donkey Stone, and the residents have no issues with the brewery. However, they have legitimate and fundamental concerns about this application and believe the only practical way of avoiding a longer-term repeat of the problems already experienced is to refuse the application outright. You have sound policy reasons for doing so. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. Has anybody got any questions of Mrs. Wright? Yes, Councillor Harkness.
Oh, it is working. Yes, I mean, obviously last time we rejected it on the grounds of noise and disturbance. I mean, I just wondered what your comments were on in terms of what has been done to remedy that. Because we've still got some concerns from the environmental health regarding the noise. And also another one is the planning officer mentioned at the start that there'd been no activity taking place. And we've had a letter amongst a number of resident people for and against have written to the councillors. And one of the letters I've just looked through mentions that since there's been a number of occasions of noise and so on. So do you know whether it has been used since the last application?
I don't know for definite. I've heard that that's the case from my clients. Can I? Your original question was about what's been done to mitigate the noise. Well, first of all, there's nothing to the building. There's no physical works are proposed to the building. The applicants have proposed a slight reduction in hours. Your officers have proposed a further reduction in hours. But I have to say, as I said in my presentation, the only proper course of action is to refuse it. The reduction in hours does not make this equivalent to the kind of uses that are on the business park at the moment. It's a totally different use, and it has totally different impacts on residential amenity.
Has any other member got a question? Mrs. Wright. Thank you, Mrs. Wright. You could resume your seat, please. And if I could ask Mr. Hourigan to take the seat. If you could address the committee, and you're aware of the 3-minute time.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, councillors. My name is Mark Hourigan of Hourigan Conley. I'm the applicant's agent. Naturally, my clients were disappointed to have been refused planning permission earlier this year, but they have listened very carefully to the concerns that were raised, and contrary to what you heard a moment ago, they have come back with a materially different scheme. However, before I go on, I'd just like to stress that the tap room has been closed as a drinking establishment since planning permission was refused. Now, you've heard a lot from objectors about unsubstantiated complaints when the tap room was open, but importantly, not a single complaint has been upheld by any department of this council, or for that matter, the police. So what's different with this revised scheme? Well, firstly, the tap room is to be tied to the brewery by way of a planning condition. In practice, that means if the brewery ceased trading, the tap room would have to close. A tap room is a really important element of a modern microbrewery. There simply is no intention, as the objectors suggest in their letters, to operate a freestanding drinking establishment independent of the brewery. That would defy the logic of how a successful microbrewery is run. Secondly, your officers are proposing that opening times be restricted to Monday to Saturday, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. They're very different hours to what we originally applied for, and they're very much in character with the business park, which, as a business park and your relevant policies, as a matter of principle, they allow for this type of use in that area. Thirdly, in respect to the control of outside areas, there's going to be no access to the rear of the premises for patrons, and patrons won't be allowed to drink outside. That will be enforced by a condition, and it will be monitored by the applicant. Clearly, it's in their interest to ensure that conditions imposed by this council are complied with. In that respect, I'd also ask you to note that the premises is fitted throughout with CCTV. Fourthly, there will be no live or amplified music. Any music will be limited to a small Sonos speaker. It's the sort of thing you'd have in your kitchen. It'll not be heard from the surrounding area. And again, a condition is proposed to control music levels so that they won't be heard from neighbouring properties. Fifthly, our client's noise consultant has undertaken a detailed noise survey, as you'd expect, and has concluded the proposed use is acceptable in noise terms. I've heard it said by the objectors that there's little difference between this scheme and the first application, but clearly there is. It's notable that there are 245 individual comments of support on the council's website, and a petition containing over 2,000 signatures has been lodged with you also. The majority of those supporters are from the local area. In contrast, you've got 39 objections from 28 different properties, but importantly, all of their concerns have been addressed in this latest application. A tap room is an important element of a modern microbrewery. It enables landlords from public houses, tourists and local people to come and sample locally made products, thereby supporting the local economy. With the safeguards you've got, I'd hope that you'd be able to support this application this evening. Thank you very much, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hourigan. Has anybody got any questions? Councillor Harkness.
Well, you answered the first question, which obviously asked the objector, but the other one is in terms of noise levels. You said there's a condition in order to comply with that. How would you ensure that you comply with that?
Well, thank you. The condition is a noise monitoring condition, so it can't reach a certain level at the boundaries of the site with residential property. If it could be heard, we'd be in breach of the condition, and the council could enforce it. The council wouldn't have, or the officers, I beg your pardon, wouldn't have proposed the condition if they didn't think it was enforceable. Obviously, Donkey Stone, it's not in their interest to upset the neighbours in terms of amenity, so they will control the level of the speaker so that it can't be heard outside. As I said earlier, it's a small speaker. It's the sort of thing you'd have in your kitchen. It's not going to be heard. We've obviously done a noise survey which has taken into account all of those things. That noise survey doesn't think that there's any need for any improvements to the fabric of the building, given the use that's proposed and the very limited background music that they would have.
Councillor Glasner.
Speaker's not working. I just wondered, you say that there definitely are changes. I didn't sit on the last panel meeting, so could you just explain to me what the differences are on this application? I can see the hours have changed, but what else has changed?
Yep, so we're proposing to tie the brewery to the drinking establishment. So the brewery stops trading, the tap room has to close. That's one of the conditions that you've got. We've obviously changed the hours. Control of outside areas, no amplified music, and this application came in with a detailed noise assessment. The previous one didn't come with a noise assessment. It didn't come with a detailed planning statement prepared by my practice. Obviously, my clients aren't property people; they're business people. They've employed us to, make a case on their behalf.
Any further questions? Councillor Brewery.
You say you're going to prevent people going outside. How are you actually going to do that? I know I saw the photographs that you've got signs up, which is fair enough. But if you have 5 lads who've had a few pints and want to go outside, how are you actually going to stop them? I say lads, I should say people, shouldn't I? Sorry.
You should, Councillor Brownridge. Obviously it's in my client's interest to enforce the house rules. The condition in the planning permission, no drinking outside. The premises is fitted with CCTV. They've adequate staff to enforce the restriction. You saw on the plans that Mr. Dickman showed you earlier, there's only one way in and one way out, and it's only one door. So they are confident that they can manage that situation so that it doesn't cause any detriment to residential amenity.
Councillor Malik.
The noise level. Has any work been done to the building to address that issue since the last application?
No, and the reason for that is that in the last application you didn't have a noise assessment before you from the applicants. This time around the applicants have commissioned a noise assessment that's looked at the fabric of the building, i.e. how it's built, how sound will transmit from it and all of those sorts of things, and they are satisfied that there isn't any need for any acoustic mitigation. That's why you've got the condition in the report that limits noise externally in relation to residential properties.
No further questions? Yes, Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. The revised hours that the planning department have recommended for approval, 11 till 6, you're happy with that? That's the first question, and the other one is, there's only 10 parking spaces. Do you think that's adequate around there if you have quite a busy day?
Just in relation to the first question, 11 till 6, I don't see we've got any choice, being perfectly blunt about it. You know, we were refused planning permission, they've gone away, they've appointed a professional team, they've come back. We applied for slightly different hours, which included evening opening hours. Your officer said they weren't satisfied with that. We are where we are. So, you know, that's the recommendation, so we have to live with it. Just in relation to spaces, there's 10 outside, but there's also a visitors parking area within the business park that's available for use for all of the units, and there's 17 spaces in that. And I know that, actually, what's here a minute, Wendy Morehouse had commented on that and was satisfied with the level of parking. My clients are satisfied with the level of parking. They think it's more than enough to cater for people coming to the premises and the wider business park.
Councillor Hewitt.
So the Environmental Health Officer's been up there and he's done a couple of assessments. Are his findings any different to yours?
Well, we've seen the comments from the Environmental Health Officer in the report. If you're referring to other assessments that have been done, we've not been provided with those. But fundamentally, you've got conditions to prevent amenity. That's what the EHOs are concerned with. We're happy with those conditions if the committee are, you know.
Are these recommendations from the EHO?
I believe they are, and they're also from your planning officers as well.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any further questions? If not, thank you, Mr. Hurrick. Right, it's the matter's open for debate now. Sorry, Councillor Curley, I haven't seen him. And I've said, I know that he's expressed that he might have some difficulties. Yeah. Councillor Harkness.
So the Environmental Health Officer, thank you, Judge. The Environmental Health Officer said, you know, they had obviously concerns with the noise, and to avoid that, we should be looking at avoiding evenings and Sundays and no amplified music to be played. But the opening hours which have been suggested include some evenings and obviously Sundays as well. So that would be my first question. And also, what's that? What's that? Sundays and bank holidays, 12 till 6:30. And
That's
Going to the condition.
In terms of the open hours,
Rather than struggle with it, possibly if Mr Dickman could...
okay, yeah, is that, and then just also, I suppose, how you would enforce condition 3 as well, if that was necessary.
Yeah, just clarifying the hours. The hours that we're recommending are set out in condition 4 on the recommendation. So the hours that Councillor Agnes was referring to previously were both those hours which were put forward on the previous application, the original application. So what we're looking at is Monday to Saturday, 11 a.m. until 6 p.m. I would say that so there's no Sunday in there. 6 p.m. Yes, we could call that evening, but that's very early evening. A lot of businesses would tend to operate in those hours. Sorry, the second question was...
How do they stop them doing that? So how, how's that enforceable? We've got that as a condition, but how is that an enforceable thing to do?
As I say, well, in fact, Mr. Horrigan said really, it's for the operator of the premises to primarily enforce that activity taking place. It's similar to any restrictions that they might have on their licence. Clearly, we're not going to be there, I won't say 24 hours a day because we don't need to be. We're not going to be there between 11 and 6 on those 6 days of the week to follow through on that. But I think the way that we've worded the condition, it does restrict their activity levels, and obviously members of the community have expressed some concerns about this. If there are problems with noise being caused during the day, then clearly our enforcement officers will be able to investigate any of those complaints, and if as a result of that it's clear that the applicant is breaching those restrictions in any way, we will take appropriate action to deal with that. Is that sufficient? Sorry, Councillor. Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Gloucester.
Yeah, I currently have an establishment in my area where noise is a real issue, and to be quite frank, environmental health have done nothing about it yet. So I do have concerns about the noise and at what point it's enforced. Is it down to somebody having it recorded from the house, or is it on just once a complaint's received? But more to the point, have any noise complaints actually been received by the local authority currently on previous operations?
Yeah, I understand that noise complaints have been received previously, and obviously a lot of that was to do with the operations, the way the business been operating. Certainly in the evenings, we all know that the ambient noise levels, the general level of noise decreases during the evening periods. This is an existing industrial estate, it's adjoining another industrial estate. There will be levels of activity normally during the day of coming to go into vehicles, people perhaps unloading and loading goods within that site. So you have to do it, you have to be reasonable in terms of saying, well, where's that noise coming from? If residents were to notice noise from these premises, it would be noticeably different from the other activity that's taking place on the site, and that's primarily going to be the music that's being played. And we are aware obviously that there were events being operated from the site, and particularly live bands playing at the premises. The noise condition that we have on the site, they will clearly be in breach of that condition if they play live music from the premises. So we will have an element of control over the activity that's taking place. Clearly, as I said previously, we can't be there to monitor activity all the time. I think the other element of this, and I think Mr. Horrigan said, this isn't necessarily what the applicant would have wanted. They would have wanted the freedom to be able to attract people at other hours. I think when we looked at the application, we were aware of the concerns of residents, but also we were aware this is a local business that appears to be doing, quite well at the moment, and we wouldn't want to stifle them. And I think some of the activities that can take place during the day are probably not likely to be the type that generate vast amounts of noise from those activities. I think it's more in the evenings that you're going to get people who, perhaps get a bit more inebriated and might start shouting and so on more. So I think by restricting the hours, you're probably doing quite well to restrict the kind of activity levels and the way people behave during those hours. You can't be 100% certain of that, but I think it does play a major part, and as a result of that, I think we're satisfied, as I said previously, those restrictions will support the business, but also make sure that the activity doesn't cause a nuisance in the area. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, can I just come back on that? So in terms of the complaints received, they've been about daytime operation, not evening operation. Am I right?
I think there's been a mix. I think there's been a mix of both. I think one of the major concerns is late into the evening. So obviously, if you go back to the hours that were originally proposed at 11 o'clock and 10:30, and then of course with people leaving the premises and still being around in the area, quite clearly, lots of people want to, be in bed or be relaxing at those sort of hours. Whereas during the hours we're suggesting, so you get night workers and so on, but generally people are out and about. You recognise that there's going to be noise and activity taking place in the area. So I think that was one element, and it was also to do with the fact that they had events on, and those events had two things. One is that, if you have live music on, or you have, fast food vans in the yard, that's going to generate noise externally. And also, it's you're not going to. You could have have events during the day, and that's where you would get daytime noise. But generally, because of the comings and goings and the outside activity and the noise, I think this suite of conditions allows us to be able to control all that.
Council Director.
To the entrance, and I've got some concerns about that in terms of.
Well, the parking area that they've got, which is obviously within this area.
Yeah, but that's in front of the entrance. Then is that not a fire hazard?
Well, it may well be, but as far as I can see at the moment, the businesses that operate from there are no restrictions on the way vehicles can park. And if they're loading, unloading, for instance, they may well park outside those areas. I take your point that members of the public are going in there. It's whether we can then get, I don't know. The only way you could do that is to get a yellow box or whatever outside the area. Yeah, I think.
I'd rather take people's safety over having cars.
Okay, we'll take that on board possibly when we come to a resolution, should we? Councillor Hewitt.
Yeah, there is a picture where the cars were parked, and they were parked either side of the entrance, not directly in front of it. You can see there, there's a gap. There's plenty of room there.
I think obviously it's a genuine concern. It's probably a concern covered under other legislation, but if that was a a make or break consideration, some marking being placed on there to prevent vehicles. And again, this goes back to the staff themselves. If somebody's going to park right outside the access door, then clearly the staff themselves need to take action against that for their own purposes. So it's not something I can imagine comes a concern. What we don't know from that picture, of course, was whether that picture was taken during a time when the tap room was actually operating or not. I suspect that when the tap room's operating, it may well be that vehicles wouldn't necessarily park directly outside it. Obviously, I can't guarantee that. I take the point, but I think that obviously the health and safety elements and the fire escape, I think, are covered by other legislation in any case.
Has anybody else got any comments? Councillor Brownridge.
Thank you. Well, there's an obvious tension, isn't there, between this use and residential amenity, which has been recognised by what's been said. But we have to accept that as it's got an industrial use and as our policy allows for an A4 use in there, we have to accept that. So I'm very much supporting the conditions the planning department are proposing. But I'm wondering if we should try granting a consent for a limited period to allow the actual operation of it to be monitored, because we've had assurances, which I have no doubt are genuine from the applicant, but it is very much dependent on it working. So I was wondering if we propose to say a 12-month permission, so that we can actually see how it operates in practice. That allows both parties to see how it operates in practice, and we can perhaps make a more informed permanent decision at the end of that period.
I think my comment is planning practice guidance is clear that temporary permissions shouldn't really be imposed unless there is a very good reason to do so. And that would mean that within the restrictions that we're imposing, committee would need to be concerned that the problems that had taken place previously on the site, and I think they are ones which can be controlled through this, would still occur during these hours. Clearly, it's open to members. If members felt that that was an appropriate way forward, you could do so. But I feel that in this particular instance, we've dealt with all those issues, and therefore we'd recommend that a permanent permission, with those restrictions and the relevant enforcement of those conditions, would be appropriate. Thank you.
Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you. I second the proposal from Councillor Brownridge. We've seen the issues previously with the business, and to alleviate the issues and to give reassurance to the community that that there is this condition on top of the business, that they need to, for a better word, behave themselves for a year. I think we need to impose this condition. Thank you.
Right, we've got a proposal on the table now that this is approved, subject to a condition for a limited time of a year, and also we'll take on board to put a condition regarding to make sure that a clear entrance is marked out. So it's open for debate on that. Has anybody got any observations on that? Councillor Ewan.
I think the conditions imposed by the officers and the environmental officers are quite draconian, and it's going to be difficult for the business to adhere to them. Putting more restrictions on against officers' advice, I think, could be quite detrimental to the business.
Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. Number one, I mean, if the proposal by Councillor Brownridge is accepted, or if it's rejected, we would still then go to the vote for this to be accepted with the terms from the planning department. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And the other thing I'll say personally, by the way, I mean, I think they've come a long way now. Let's, personally, I think there's enough changes been made. I don't think we need any more conditions for what it's worth.
Councillor Hudson.
Chairman, what worries me is that we need to have all these conditions. Shouldn't the planners be asking, is this outlet in the right place? I think clearly the brewery is in the right place. It's an industrial estate, and I don't think anybody objects to that. I think the retail sale of drink and people there, I wonder whether this is the right place. And why are we imposing impossible conditions when we should be saying it's clearly in the wrong place?
Mr. Dickman would like to make a comment on that.
Yeah, I think again we go back to the guidance and how we should assess planning applications. Conditions are important because they allow permission to be granted which would otherwise be refused. And I think in this instance, yes, there are a lot of conditions. I don't think they're impossible conditions to operate within, but we need to be looking at the proposal and say, well, are the conditions, they make it acceptable? If so, then we should support the application. The fact that we need conditions is not of itself a reason to refuse the proposal. I think the other comment that I would make on that is that clearly an A4, a drinking establishment use, is not something traditionally you would find on an industrial estate. There are a couple of elements to that which members will see in the report. One is that the area is allocated as a business employment area, and in fact suitable uses within business employment areas actually do include A4 drinking establishment activities, obviously subject to all the other criteria of assessing the impact of that. So in terms of the council's own policy, it's not necessarily unacceptable. I think the other point to make is that you get the link between this, and it's not quite the same, but you get factory shops, which again can be found on industrial estates, which provide produce or serve to support that particular business. And in a way, there's an analogy with what's being proposed now, particularly given the condition that we're recommending to tie the activity to the brewery. So it's to help them and to support their business, rather than saying, you know, if somebody came along on there with just, I want to turn this industrial unit into a pub, without any connection to the site, I can really see that there is some concerns about that. But here it's to support an industrial productive business on the estate, and I think that's the reason why it's an appropriate use in this type of location. And I think we actually find throughout the country there are actually quite a few breweries based on industrial estates that have tap rooms associated with them. Thank you.
Right, members, we've got a proposal before us from Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Iqbal, that we approve this subject to a time limit of a year. So I'll take the vote now. All those in favour of that proposal? Sorry, and the condition about keeping a clear marked entrance to the premises. So all those in favour? Those against? So we've got approval subject to a year, a condition of a 12-month test period, and also that we actually include another amendment, another condition of making sure that the entrance is fully marked to give free access to it. Thank you very much indeed. If we again can move on to the Christchurch school application. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if we could move on to the Christchurch application, and if I could ask the officers to outline the application.
Thank you, Chair. The application before you is retrospective, and it's for the erection of a pagoda within the school grounds. From the plan here, you can see that the pagoda is within the northwest corner of the site, and the roads adjacent to it are Linkdale Avenue and Kent Avenue on this side, and the closest residence properties are those on Linkdale Avenue there. The next slide gives you elevational drawings. The highest point is 3 metres. It has a lean-to roof design. It's timbering construction. This photo on site shows the separation from the closest neighbouring properties, which are here. That distance is noted within the report to be, from the rear elevations, to be 14 metres, and the boundary is approximately 2 metres in height. There's a further image of the full structure on site with paving underneath so that it can be used. Obviously it's roofed so that it provides some weather screening. Further picture showing its relationship with the closest neighbouring properties, and then another showing its separation off the boundary with Kent Avenue. Oh, sorry. In relation to it, the main issues raised by both the objectors and the ward councillor, Councillor McLaren, sorry, I should have said at the beginning, who upped the application to be heard at planning committee, is the noise and disturbance related with the structure. This has been considered by the environmental health section, and they have raised no objection. The officer notes that the noise and disturbance associated with the structure would be during the daytime hours, and they would be infrequent given that it's within the playground and for occasional use for teaching. The other main consideration, which is noted in the report in terms of residential amenity, issues are the loss of light from gardens. Obviously it's an open structure apart from the roof, and it's set well off the boundary with the closest residential properties, and the others raised are possible issues in terms of antisocial behaviour. However, it's clear that the site is bounded by 2 metre high fences all the way around and significant planting there, and as such the security of the site is considered to be acceptable, that it wouldn't be an issue. So the application has been recommended for approval. Thank you very much, Chair.
Has anybody got any questions of the officers? Councillor Brewery.
Bearing in mind this is a retrospective application, have we any evidence that the concerns the residents have expressed have actually happened? So have we had any complaints about noise and antisocial behaviour? I mean, I think the concern's more about out of school hours, I guess, because obviously that's one of the grounds of objection. So is there any evidence that any of that's happened so far?
Thank you, Councillor Brownridge. In relation to the application, the only information before me is that we've had 5 letters of objection, and there wasn't any information in that ilk provided from our Environmental Health Department.
Councillor Ewing.
In your report, you said it was the structure that was making the noise. I take it you meant the children when they're in school? I've never heard a pagoda make a noise, by the way.
Thank you, Councillor. In relation to it, I'm not the case officer. I'm here just to present the case to you. I'm sure that is an unmeaningful mistake and a slip of words. Sorry about that.
A question, though. Yeah. It's a primary school. If children didn't make noise, there'd be something wrong. Yeah.
Is there any further questions to the officers? If not, could I ask Mr. Galloway to... Sorry, Councillor.
3 metres is its tallest point.
Yeah. Councillor.
In the report, it's in the residential amenity section of the planning considerations.
Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question, how long has this structure been up? You say it's the planning permission application is retrospective, so how long has it been up for?
I'll just have a quick look in the file, just be a second.
I think if I can come in there, this was originally brought to our attention by the local member as a result of some complaints from neighbouring residents. From my understanding is it's quite a few months that the structure has been in place. Possibly it might even be during the summer that it was actually placed there. I think the other thing to point out is that where the structure is, that hard standing, my understanding again is that was already there. So it probably dictated to some extent where they decided to put it. Again, just going on another the issues that was raised about activity and complaints, I'm not aware that there's been any complaints about antisocial behaviour outside school hours. I think it's more to do with concerns about the activity that obviously the school is seeking to be authorised. Thank you.
Councillor Hudson.
I would like to move the application be accepted.
We do have speakers, Councillor Hudson.
Well, I've been down there, and it has been up several months.
Yeah, okay.
And nobody were interested. Right?
Yeah.
I asked a few people, and they didn't even know it was there.
Well, could we... Sorry, one.
Point of clarification. Does it actually need planning permission? The permitted sort of development?
I think probably should be with the speakers.
Yeah. Well, at this stage, if we could deal with the speakers and ask Mr. Galloway to come and address the meeting.
Good evening, I do apologise. To put some facts straight, this structure is the second structure to be put up. The original structure was up for a year, which stood over 4 metres high, had an apex roof, and we contacted the Right Honourable MP, Mr McMahon, to step in, which he involved the planning committee in. We had approached the school prior to this to ask them to move this structure within another area of the curtilage of the school, which the school area is 1.3 hectares in area, and there are several areas that they could quite easily have put this structure in and moved some flagstones. That's all we asked. They weren't really interested in what we had to hear, and that came from 6 residential households. We are, however, aware of the noise of this classroom area that they're now calling it. It will become a classroom, and it's going to be a meeting place for the football people. So it's right at our fences. We're expecting people overlooking our private gardens type of thing. You know, we could be out sitting sunbathing or whatever, and the noise during the day, we put up with it because it's playtime. It's only 15 minutes in the morning, half an hour lunchtime, and 15 minutes in the afternoon. But when you've got a classroom of children right next door to you, it's quite loud, I can assure you, because we've had it happen before. All 6 residents in the houses have strongly objected to this. The councillor said nobody had spoken about it. I can quite assure you that we have been very, very vocal about this with our local councillors. The school they weren't interested at all in what we had to say. I put an idea to them that would be cheaper, and it would have become an adequate shelter for them, and would have been a cheaper version for them, but they just weren't interested. They wanted a pergola. And the second thing is, when does a pergola not become a kit pergola? When they put a roof on it, it then becomes a shed.
and that's how it stands at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Galloway. If you possibly could take your seat. Oh, sorry. Is anybody got any questions? Councillor Gloucester.
When you said that there was a structure there previously that was 4 metres high, 4 metres, and how long was that up for?
That was up for over a year.
Councillor Brewery.
Thank you. You mentioned use by football. Can you just explain what that meant? You referred to football.
They have a football pitch right next to it, and they said that they were going to use it in order for football games because they had an application in or were receiving a grant from Football England.
So can I
Or
clarify?
Sports England, I correct myself there.
Is that football activities outside the school day? Are you talking about use by people other than the school pupils?
Yes.
Has anybody got any further questions of Mr. Galloway? Councillor Ewing.
Can I ask how long you've lived in your house?
I've been there for about 4 years.
And was the school there when you moved in?
When I moved in, no, but when my partner was in, there was no school there.
The school's been open for less than 4 years?
No, the school's been there for about 17, maybe 20 odd years as far as I know. I couldn't tell you exactly.
So the school's always been there?
The house was there before the school.
Yeah, but the school was there before you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there any further questions? Councillor Ewing.
Thank you. So, in terms of the light issues that are mentioned as one of the reasons for objection, I'm just wondering how does that affect? Is it just into the garden, or does it affect the property as well? And also, in terms of having the classes there, and you said it might get overlooked by people. I'm just wondering, how tall is the fencing or the bushes or that people have got in their back gardens, or for example yourself?
The fencing is about 1.3 to 1.25 metres high, and the original structure stood 4 metres high, and if it had been roofed, would have had an adverse effect on lighting. Because they've dropped it down to 3 metres, it has a limited effect on the garden.
Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, the previous thing that was up there before, you say the MP got involved with it. Was it an illegal structure? I mean, why was it pulled down if it was only there a year?
Well, the MP asked the planning department to look into it, and they suggested that planning permission should have been sought to put the structure up in the first place. I did approach the school prior to it, and they said they didn't need planning permission.
Could Mr. Dickman address that issue after Mr. Galloway has? Is there any further questions of Mr. Galloway? Councillor Pithy.
Not working. So this structure then, how is it impacting on your quality of life?
Well, it's the privacy of the back garden when we go out in to sunbathe. We've got kids peering over looking into, you know, if we have a barbecue, Mister can have a burger and onions, you know, they're only little bits of kids, don't get me wrong, but they range up to about 12-year-old. You know, and again, when the football's on, you can hear parents shouting and goodness knows what, you know. Language is not always coarse, of course. It is, very much so.
Councillor Actor.
Is it used after school hours, or just during school hours?
It has been used after school hours.
How often?
There's no set times, it's just intermittent.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. Thanks very much, Mr. Galloway. If Yes, if I could ask, if you could take your seat and ask Councillor Taylor to address the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. The ward councillors have been contacted by several residents regarding the pergola, which has been constructed on the playing field of Christchurch C of E Primary School. In particular, the residents have drawn our attention to the imposing nature of the structure when viewed from the rear of their properties. And from a visual perspective, I have to say that I do agree that it is not in keeping with the local area. Firstly, the pergola does not solely consist of a lattice roof. It has a perspex cover, and the supporting structure is also of a substantial nature. Therefore, it is more imposing than you may imagine from the terminology. It is not a flimsy garden-like trellis structure that you might naturally think of when you hear that word. I would also draw your attention to the officer's report, which states that the pergola is situated a minimum of 14 metres from the rear of the residential property. This measurement is presumably the distance to the actual house. The distance to the rear of the fence of the property that is nearest, by my calculation, is about 4 metres away from that nearest property. Due to the proximity of the structure to the neighbouring residential gardens, I do have concerns about concentrated noise when children gather in and around the pergola, as it can be expected that there will be periods of intense noise generated through excitement as they play together. This being the case, it would have a significant impact on residents who wish to use their garden for leisure and relaxation. The school has indicated that the use of the building will be intermittent and restricted to school hours only. While I accept this is the intention, I cannot see how this could be guaranteed, as the word intermittent is subject to interpretation. The school also gave planning and assurance that child supervision will be provided at all times while the pergola is in use. However, this cannot always be guaranteed either, due to staff absence or having to deal with incidents elsewhere. Another assumption made in the report is that the school playing field is enclosed by a fence that would prevent the pergola being used for antisocial behaviour. However, ward councillors receive regular complaints about the school fence being breached and varying degrees of antisocial behaviour. If the pergola, as it has been erected in its current location, once youths in the area find out that it's there, I feel this will actually lead to an increase in antisocial behaviour in the area, as it will help to obstruct the antisocial activity from general view, and it will provide them with protection from the elements. This will undoubtedly have a negative impact on local residents. The report also states there is likely to be a significant amount of noise generated by pupils within the school grounds currently. While we accept that this is the case, the area in question is not currently an area where pupils congregate, and I would also like to point out that the houses were there, as were many of the residents, before the school was built. I do think it is unfortunate that we are in this situation, because as ward councillors, we initially made representation to the school in early summer about the proposed pergola, in order to try and avoid any invasion of privacy for the neighbours and to seek a cordial way forward in agreeing a more appropriate siting for the pergola, given the function of the structure. At that time, the school agreed to refer the matter to their Buildings Committee for further consideration in October of this year. However, during the summer break, they instead decided to proceed without any advance communication or consideration for their neighbours and without the appropriate planning permission. I wish to emphasise that we have no objection to a pergola, but we feel that it would be mutually beneficial if it could be located on another part of the school site, which would not cause disturbance for local residents or attract unwanted antisocial behaviour. I would also like to ask a question of the officer regarding the playing fields. A recent application at Mills Hill School was referred to Sport England for consultation, as they are a statutory consultee on planning applications for development affecting playing fields. Therefore, is there not a need to consult with Sport England in this case too?
Sorry, well,
This is a really big site. All this would have been offset if they had just moved it to a different part of the site. So have they come back to you at all and indicated why they chose not to listen?
They ceased all communication. As I understand it, it was the chair of the Board of Governors and the head teacher who made the decision during the summer period, and they decided to proceed with it. We had been given an assurance that there would be discussion around this. It will go to the Buildings Committee, which was due to happen in October. We had communicated that to the residents, and the only time we became aware of it was when obviously the structure was starting to be built and the residents made contact with us. We've spoken to the school and they made it quite clear that they intended to proceed with it. And it was as a result of that that we went to planning to find out if they required a planning approval for this, hence why we're in the situation now as having a retrospective application.
So I presume you want it moved nearer to the building, don't you? Away from that there, so sort of more into the... Have you got a specific... have you discussed with them several... Actually, if you moved it here, we'd be happy with that. Have you got envisaged a particular area where you would want it? So we've got a map up there behind you in terms of...
No, so I think essentially what we're here to do and what we wanted to do from the start was to have mutual discussions. We expect the school to be a good neighbour, and we think that it is a big ask for them to sit down and have a discussion about where might be suitable, where might be convenient. I don't think it's our role to dictate to them, but I think what's happened here, I think we pointed out earlier on, they happen to have a plot, well, some concrete, and they've just gone for that because it's the easiest place to site it. There is a big playing field there, and there were numerous options. In terms of the local residents and the impact it's had on the neighbouring properties, they have probably chosen the worst location in the field for that. And I think it's disappointing personally that they wasn't willing to have any discussions either with ward councils or the local residents. We had a similar, we had a planning application for Millsdale School not too long ago, and the approach from the school was very different. You know, they were willing to talk to us even though they wouldn't necessarily concede on certain elements of the application, but I think it's about that process, isn't it? And I think, you know, the school, they just wouldn't engage around it. And so unfortunately, we've got ourselves into a situation where they're now putting in a retrospective planning application. We feel we have to oppose it. I just don't think we should be here. We should have had the conversation first. We should have been able to mutually agree. Like I say, the residents do not want to stop this happening. It's where it's been cited that is the problem. The other point that I would add to that is, because you're saying that you haven't got a record of antisocial behaviour, we have had antisocial behaviour reported. Not recently, it's been ongoing for a long time. So on Kent Avenue, there's actually a road sign, and they use that to step up to climb over the fence. And we've actually been in discussions about whether we can get that signage moved. So antisocial behaviour has been going on for quite a long time, and I think that this structure went up in the summer. So you know, we've then got into the winter months, but in reality, I think when we get into the lighter nights next year, people realise it's there. I think it will become something because it is in view once you get into the school field. I think it is something that people will use. It protects them from the elements, and it's a roof structure. So.
Well, it's actually supposed to the officer whether they could, in terms of the site location, whether there's an opportunity in play, maybe deferring and sort of subject to looking at a relocation.
Well, at this stage, again, at this stage, we're just concluding any questions to Councillor.
I know that you're not going to know the answer to this question, but have they said how often they intend to use it? Because obviously the resident mentioned about noise from children, and you're talking about noise from antisocial behaviour, which is not children from the school, and I'm assuming that is more of an issue than the noise from the children. But again, it comes down to how often are they going to use it. I know my school has a pergola and probably used it a lot when it first went up, but actually now they don't really use it much. You know, I just wondered if they've give me any, or whether the other structure was up. How often did they use that for the children?
I don't exactly know the answer to that question. I think because they haven't been speaking to us, it's difficult for us to know. I think they have given assurances, but they've given them in such loose terminology that it doesn't really mean anything. I think, as was indicated before, they have now put in for a grant, which may create additional usage that was not put forward in the planning application. But essentially, it's going to be an outside classroom. It is very close. If you can imagine 4 metres from the back of your fence, it's a, you know, it really is probably as close as it could be. And I think the issue is that, yeah, there will be some noise from the children who use it during that period. But it's really more about, it's about the privacy and it's about the impact it has. So, and it works both ways actually. So I mean, I think for the residents, it wouldn't be unreasonable for them to say, well, we want to sit out and listen to music and have a barbecue or do whatever we want to do. And that has an impact on the children, because if it's an outdoor classroom, how are they meant to learn if you decide, well, I'm going to play loud music, which you're quite within your rights to do if you want to sit in your garden and listen to music. So I just don't think it's been thought through, and I think it does come down to a breakdown in communication. I think had we had this communication in the first place, and they were aware of the situation, that they should have had planning permission, and they went ahead regardless. They've already felt kind of fallen foul of this once, so to do it twice isn't a mistake really. And I think they had just made the decision that that was the cheapest place to erect the structure, and he was going to go ahead, and they didn't want to have discussion and conversation, because in their mind that was the place they wanted to site it. And I just think that if planning permission is granted, retrospectively, I do envisage that it will cause problems going forward. I think both from an antisocial behaviour point of view, but also I think from both resident and from the school's point of view, because I think the structure for an outside classroom is simply too close to the rear of the property and the gardens which will be used.
Okay, I think that's about it. Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor.
Just answer the question about the Sports England.
Sorry?
Sport England consultation. There's a question about Sport England.
Well, I think we have got a divide here, you know, that we're going into committee now, and Councillor Taylor is just here to address the committee.
So yeah, there was a question to the officer around Sport England, around whether
Yeah.
as a statutory consultee. But just to emphasise
Yeah.
that point, Chair, sorry.
It really should be a member that's asking these questions, you see. It's, but, sorry?
I am a member.
Not of the committee. Not of the committee, you aren't, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, we'll get the question answered. I'm just saying, you know, there is a divide that we have. Is there any further questions of Councillor Taylor? No? Thanks very much, Councillor Taylor.
If I can't ask it, I would appreciate it if another member.
Well,
Because that's the question of
I think we're going to ask the office to respond to matters that's been raised, and there's about 3 or 4 of those. Okay, so we're going into general discussion now, but before we do that, I think there's been about 3 or 4 issues that's been raised. One, the major one was raised by Councillor Davies, was does this actually require planning permission, this structure, or could it be under permitted development?
I'll answer that one. The reason why it needs permission is because of its proximity to the boundary. Had it been further into the site, no, it wouldn't have required permission.
And then there is an issue about the development of the sports field, which obviously create activity, and I think there's been a suggestion that Sports England should have been involved, and I think yeah.
In relation to Sports England, given the position in the corner there, it actually doesn't affect the sports pitch. The sports pitch is There's a footpath directly around the whole pitch. The full football pitch goes from, you're at one goal end here, and it goes away from us down to the west. And as such, where it's positioned, it doesn't affect the usage of the playing field, so they don't need the pitch, the playing pitch, so it doesn't need to be consulted.
Is there any further questions? Sorry. The previous construction.
We were just, whilst that was being discussed, that's why we were checking our enforcement records as to whether we had that. The first record we have on this site in relation to this type of structure was in September this year, and it relates obviously to this particular structure. So we don't appear to have any records of an enforcement complaint for another structure, similar structure on the site. So we can't obviously provide any further information on that, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Councillor Actor.
I think the point about the Sport England application was that but in the evening as well, and that would affect the residents' amenity sort of space. I think that was a point that that the residents were trying to make, and Councillor Taylor as well, I think. So if they are successful in the future, obviously that the usage of it will increase.
The sports pitch already exists. There is a formal laid out football field across the majority of the area, but it's set quite centrally. And like I say, there is a formal path that you can actually see from the aerial photos on Google that runs round the entirety of the playground, and as such, this building and other play equipment that is next to it, existing play equipment that's next to it, aren't affecting the use of the playing pitch. They play no, but they haven't shortened. The pitch is already there, so it doesn't. By putting them there, it doesn't mean that you're not to be able to use the football pitch. It doesn't affect the use of the sporting field. There you go. You can see there. So you can see there the path goes all the way around, and they've still got a formal laid out football pitch. The application makes no reference to that, so it's not information that can be brought into consideration as part of us considering the application. We're merely considering the erection of that facility not affecting the sporting pitch and the benefits and the negatives that it brings. And obviously it's balanced that pagoda there obviously is retrospective, but we still consider it the same way. It has benefits in terms of both the educational benefits, as we've talked about, the play benefits for the children in different weather conditions, but the negatives are weighing the impacts which the residents have raised. We've considered that, our environmental health officers have considered that. The distance from the boundary is 6 metres. The boundary fences that you've all seen on the photos, which have been taken by the officer, they're in my opinion are between 1.8 and 2 metres. You can see that on the photos in comparison to the structure, and as such it's deemed that the impact on residential amenity in comparison to the existing use of the playground and sports pitches isn't sufficient enough to warrant a recommendation of refusal. And it's balancing the positives against the negatives and considering whether you feel that you have sufficient planning grounds against the planning policies in the local plan to state that you all believe that it should be refused. And then when an officer has weighed it and made his recommendation, he feels that the benefits are there and they outweigh the harm.
Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair. Is this football pitch accessible to the public after school? Does anybody know the answer to that?
I think the answer is probably no. That nobody knows the answer to it, but it obviously has the potential of outside bodies using the pitch, one would think. Councillor Brownridge.
How far would it have to be moved to make it permitted development? You said it only needed permission because of its proximity to the boundary. How far away would it have to be moved to make it PD?
From my recollection, 5 metres. So it's not so far away from being PD.
So, sorry, can we clarify? Councillor Taylor said she thought the distance between it and the rear fence was about 4 metres. The case officer or the reporting officer just said 6 metres. So what's the, remind me, I should know this and I don't, what's the limit for PD? Is it 4 metres or 5 metres? We're talking from the rear boundary, the fence, not the boundary, not the back of the house.
There are certain permitted development rights that apply to schools or education establishments, so we can look at that. In fact, I should be able to get you a precise answer for that one fairly quickly.
The precise answer of the measurement is 5.45 metres. I've just got the plan out. I do apologise. I took it from their statement, and I'll just open the GDPO now. Oh, there you go. Graham's got it.
Has anybody else got any questions?
Have we opened the floor yet?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Right, thanks, Chair. I mean, the concerns I've got about this is there's been, I don't know, we're not quite sure why the previous building or whatever you want to call it was up gold or whatever it was up before. We're not sure why they had to pull it down, but it wasn't up for long. We know that. Why did they have to pull that? The school potentially knows that there's issues with it. The ward councillors have tried working with the school. The school then has cut the ties with the ward councillors, just completely cut them out, gone ahead with it, and now they think they can come to planning and they think they can just build it. I've got concerns about people doing this.
I think we probably all have, but obviously it's a planning application that's before us, and that's what we unfortunately have to be focused just on the planning application that's before us. Is there anybody else got any? Sorry, Councillor Imbro.
Taking a lot of my questions, but I'll let him off for that. My concern is why the school has chosen that particular spot so close to the residential houses. I mean, I can see it's quite a big field, and they could have chosen another spot. I know they've got a football pitch and they wanted it so close to the pitch, but I mean, they could have chosen another spot on the playing field and taken into consideration the residents.
Well, I think probably everybody around the table and in the room agrees with that. It's just that obviously we're in a position here that the school's decided to go ahead with this and go ahead with the planning application. So we just have to be focused really on that, not particularly, unfortunately, the behaviour of the school and the way that they've interacted with councillors and local residents. Councillor Hume.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know how possible it is, but is there a way we could put a condition on about maybe putting some planting in between the people's houses and the pergola, just as some sort of way to screen and stop people going near the residents' fences and to sort of try and alleviate some of the noise issues?
Could certainly bear that in mind when there is somebody moves a resolution. Councillor Hudson.
Schools that have done this, I think it's the planning department, and we're told if it moved a little way it would be allowed and we wouldn't have nothing we could do about it. I think we're nitpicking here with the school. Everybody grumbles throughout the metropolitan borough about the noise of children as we're getting older, and I'm probably the oldest here. We all worry about noise because we didn't worry when we were young and we just made it. But I think I have heard nothing tonight that stops me from thinking there's any planning thing. So I will move it once again, Chairman. I hope this is the right time now.
Well, I appreciate you moving it. Does anybody, you're moving approval?
the recommendation
Yeah.
from the planning department.
Is that seconded?
Excuse me, Chair. I think we need an answer to the question because
I appreciate that.
I
I'm
think
just.
I think we really do. Before we can move on, I think we need to know, because it's significant to me. If
Well-
they moved it hard, you had to move it 6 inches, and it would become permitted development. That's a significant consideration. If they have to move it 5 metres, 10 metres, different stories. We do need that clarification.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I must admit I'm confused, because we've had 3 different answers, and of the measurements and of what's been said, it's actually can fall within permitted development. So I think we need that clarified.
Right, it gets more complicated. I was right with the 5 metres normally apply. It actually ties in with what Councillor Taylor was saying earlier on, but doesn't alter the fact that Sport England won't be need to be notified. In terms of the way the regulations, in terms of whether you need planning permission or not, are worded, the relationship of the playing field with its surroundings doesn't change. So because even though it's outside the playing field, the way the permitted development rights are worded, it's still classed as being part of the playing field, and that's the reason why it needs permission. It is 5.4 metres away from the boundary, so it is just over the distance. So regardless of the use of the area, if it had been less than 5, it would have needed permission anyhow. In this instance, it needs it because the definition in the permitted development rights is that the whole area around the site, not just the pitch itself, which is what Matthew referred to earlier on, is actually covered. So that's the reason why it needs permission. But to reiterate the point, as you can see from there, it's not actually within an area of the identified marked out playing field pitch.
So therefore, it's been moved that we approved this by Councillor Hudson. Is that seconded?
Thank you, Chair. I'll second the nomination that we put a condition on to put a sound barrier, trees or bushes, whatever, around the structure, or maybe a few feet away, that shades the noise away from the nearest properties. I think that was recommended as a suggestion from one of my colleagues before.
So what you, just to put it, that an agreed planting scheme is approved between the Piola and the residents' houses as a condition of approval. Councillor Browning.
So can I ask Mr Dickman, could we have a condition restricting its use to school hours only? Because obviously, I mean, I know that's not going to stop possible antisocial behaviour, but one of the concerns was if they start using the pitch for football outside school hours. So could we have a condition limiting the use of the pergola, say, till 3 o'clock in the afternoon whenever school finishes? Would that be feasible?
I think that would be a difficult one. One, we would need to know what the particular school hours are on this particular site as well, and if they have some after-school activities as well, would it subsequently restrict those? As you say, school could finish at 3 o'clock, so it could, if there was this after-school activity till 4, 5 o'clock or whatever, would you realistically want to restrict that level of activity? Again, all these are within the wanted committee if you felt that would overcome the concerns, but I'm a bit concerned about whether there's a justification for just saying the school hours themselves. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just ask another question? Because one of the issues that the residents raised was the fact that because the fencing isn't particularly high, there's a degree of overlooking there that could cause a problem to the school because of the activities in the gardens. I just raise a question, is there any issue about safeguarding there? I mean, I have to say I'm really surprised that this hasn't got a great big palisade fence around it, because I thought all schools were like concentration camps these days. So quite surprised it's just sort of an ordinary domestic fencing. But is there any concern about the putting concentrated children's activities so close to residential properties in terms of safeguarding? I mean, it's not a question for us really, it's a question for the school, but I'm just a bit surprised if there's that degree of overlooking between the two different things that's not been raised as a safeguarding issue.
I think that's the issue. That's the problem, isn't it? It's not an issue that we can consider in planning terms. I don't know whether you've got any.
But clearly, I can't comment on that particular issue. I think the one that has been mentioned, it won't necessarily stop noise and nuisance, but it might help with the privacy. Is if there is a planting scheme implemented, certainly on that side of the structure, so that it obscures views through to the site. That's obviously could be a legitimate planning condition.
Councillor Yu.
Thank you. So in terms of when you went to check on the guidelines about the peninsula development rights, and you said something that maybe just questions, should this have had a consultation then with Sports England? Is that, because you sounded like you said that, and I was just checking whether that's what you said, or did I mishear you?
Sorry for the confusion. So the permitted development rights relate to the whole area as the playing field. Sports England are about the formal playing of sports fields. It's quite clear that this doesn't impact the usage of the sports field, which is the football pitch. So there's no loss of playing fields in terms of Sports England's concern. It relates to the area around it. But permitted development rights relate to schools playing field as the area which they use for play. And obviously, as you can see there, I mean, just lower than the structure is actual outdoor play equipment like climbing and monkey bars and all that sort of thing. So they're on playing fields for the school, but not on the playing field of the football pitch.
Councillor Malik.
Thanks, Chair. My question is around where this is screening and the planting of the trees. If we were to put plant trees in front of the fencing, would that not be a problem for the resident? Deflecting the light from their gardens?
What I think we suggested was an approved planting scheme. So basically that planting scheme would be designed between the planning officers and the school. Right. There doesn't seem to be... Councillor Gloucester. Obviously, you can put a planting scheme in that doesn't necessarily have trees there, you know. So, Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's a bit unfortunate. We've had one of the residents here, and we're not allowed to ask him would he mind if there was trees there. But to be fair, he was nodding his head, and he didn't seem to approve of them to me.
Right. What we've got. Sorry?
Hedge, not trees, really, is what.
Yeah. What we're suggesting, and that's why I suggested the wording was a planting scheme agreed and put forward by the planning department. And we'll probably be looking at a hedge that would actually just surround the pergola, so it would give some privacy to the residents. That's just for clarity. So what we have proposed now is approval, moved by Councillor Hudson, seconded by Councillor Iqbal, with a planting scheme around to protect the privacy of the residents that has to be agreed with the planning department. So I'll put that to the board. So, no. Unfortunately, there has to be clarity here that with it being a semi-judicial process, that only members, once we've gone into discussion, can contribute. So all those in favour of the proposal by Councillor Hudson?
Right, raise your hands nice and high now, people. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Right, those against? That's approved subject to that condition anyway.
The local councils that represent this ward be consulted on the planting scheme, because I think that would go some way for them to feel they had an input into this situation.
I think that certainly the officer will note that your comments, Councillor Hudson. Yeah. Okay then, thanks very much indeed. If we can move on to and go through the agenda as we have it. The first item is the All Nations Church, Edgerton Street. And I believe that we will firstly get the officers to do a presentation on this.
Thank you, Chair. So the application before you is for the erection of an indoor rock climbing centre with the associated landscaping and works. The application site is the All Nations Church, Adjoining Street, and the building, as you can see on the plan here, has actually been demolished. So the site is now vacant. The site is bounded to the north and the south by existing roads. To the north it's Edgerton Street, to the south it's Rock Street. To the west is a nursery, and then St Mary's Way and the town centre. And to the east is, at the northern point of the site, which you can just make out here, is the Madlow Centre, and here is a local surgery. This is the building that previously occupied the site. As you can see from the photo, there's a car park area at the lower ground level, and Rock Street is where this photo has been taken from. This building, the original building, is set into the landscape, and this point at the back is Edgerton Street, where the building obviously is of a much smaller scale originally, but that's been removed. The proposed building would be set into the hillside. The drop is 7 metres across the site. To facilitate the construction of the building, there would be a loss of 12 trees on the site. The entrance to the building would be, main entrance to the building would be as the previous and become from Edgerton Street. Moving forward, you can see the building here. The building is clearly set into the hillside, and that's why the side elevations are here first. A building like this, obviously an indoor rock climbing centre, in principle is acceptable in the town centre because it improves the leisure facilities and the provision within the town centre for the people of Oldham. But a building like this, obviously the form has to take into account the function heavily, and a climbing centre obviously needs height and for the provision of the facility. So at this end, the highest point is on Rock Street, and it is 17.7 metres in height, and obviously that is to make the provision of the climbing area. The roof gradually slopes up from Edgerton Street to take account of that. This is the end elevation in relation to Rock Street, and that is the one from Edgerton Street. The plan here at the bottom is to show members, because of the form requiring such a height, and obviously the building not being able to have traditional fenestration, the supporting statements quite clearly outlines the design principles that they've taken into consideration. I've had a read of that this afternoon, and in relation to that, they've quite clearly taken into consideration the rock forms in the area around the Saddleworth area and climbing features that are famous nationally, as I understand, and they've taken into consideration they have grains and they have like a flow to them, and the directional arrows there at the bottom are to take into consideration. And I'll read it from the report. The grain of the panels are set in different directions, and this is to reduce the scale and mass of it. Is to gain interest and give a feature to it, even though in the main it would be flat. It's to give texture to it. Moving forward, this is from Google, the 3D in Google, and this is to give the members a very good impression of the scale of the buildings around the site. You can see the site falls away, and you can see the Madlow Centre there and the scale and massing of that. The officer and I believe that the massing of this, whilst it is close to Rock Street, it actually is very similar in terms of its massing in relation to the Madlow Centre. The Madlow Centre again provides an offering to the town centre and the people of Oldham, which is of great need, and it obviously follows its function, relates to its form. And then moving forward again, this is shown it the opposite way, and you can quite clearly see that on Edgerton Street here, these are 3-storey dwellings. As being from the town and being educated at Blue Coat School, I remember these being built. These are actually set well above the ground level. If you walk on the street there are Agabian baskets, they're set quite high, and it was to take into account the cut and fill, and I remember that happening around the site. So the height on Edgerton Street is quite high. Obviously, the building there, you've got the Madlow Centre again, that is 2 stories in height at the front, but they followed the form of the original building. It's single story there, and then it picks up. The final image shows a view from the main church in Oldham, and obviously the site itself is in the town centre, but it's also in the town centre conservation area. So the applicants have had a conservation area appraisal done, and they have considered the views to our heritage assets. And whilst it is a large building, it's noted that their report says that there wouldn't be any significant harm to the views of those in the wider aspect. Just to make account of it, these are the buildings at Edgerton Street, this is the surgery, and you can see the height there of the Madlow Centre. And if you look back at the street image, you can see that it's a similar height. Taking into account the fact that it isn't considered to have a residential amenity impact, the significant gain to the town centre, and the supporting statements that go along with the design, and the key consideration of that, it is supported by officers and recommended for approval subject to condition. Thank you very much, Chair.
Anybody got any questions of the officer at this stage? Councillor Damon.
Thanks, Chair. Has there been any objections to this development?
There is one objection. The objection was, traffic and parking concerns. However, you can see in the report that the traffic and parking considerations have been considered by our highway engineer, and given that it's located in a sustainable location within the town centre, close to public transport links and major public car parks, that it isn't considered to be an issue. You can see there that it's Rock Street car park. I'm sure a lot of us will have parked there in the past.
Councillor Ackner. Yes, we do have a speaker. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. The one from the...
No, I missed a picture.
Okay.
I don't know which.
So there's...
Was it one of a street view of the building?
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Interpretation?
Yeah, so it's this at the bottom. So, I'll press that, so you know what I mean. So, on the right-hand side, it's the Madlow Centre, which is the high building with the grey areas. The low building is the surgery. To the left is the nursery. And then the buildings behind, which you can see faintly, there's a...
Is there any further questions? No? Councillor Hewitt? Right. Mr. Lawyer's down to speak. I don't know. Would you like to? Yeah. Yeah.
I'm asking on the pound of flesh.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. As many of you know, I'm Steve Lowe, and I'm the project manager for the Stella Charitable Trust, who are the developers for this climbing centre, through its not-for-profit trading subsidiary SCT Climbing Limited, and it will be known as Summit Up. This will be one of the largest climbing centres in Greater Manchester, combining clip and climb, bouldering, lead climbing, soft play and a cafe area. After extensive marketing research commissioned by the Trust, Sir Norman Sol has selected climbing for the following reasons. Climbing is the fastest growing healthy activity in the UK, with both lead climbing and speed climbing and bouldering becoming an Olympic sport in 2020. We will have the equivalent of these Olympic walls here in Oldham. It will be providing a family leisure opportunity for all ages from 2 to 92. I'm not sure Sir Norman will be one climbing at 85, but it is within the town centre. It will enhance and support the council with their town centre developments at Prince's Gate, the Heritage Centre and the cinema. Our forecasts indicate potentially between 80 to 90,000 visitors each year will visit not only the climbing centre but the town centre, and will create up to 40 jobs, many of whom will be for youngsters. With no parking on the site, we are encouraging visitors to use public transport and the town centre car parks, and not just to visit Summit Up, but the other attractions for a complete day out in the town centre. But most importantly, all the profits generated will be made available to the charitable trust to continue to support local community groups and in particular improving the lives of young people within the town and make Oldham a place people will enjoy visiting and retain Sir Norman's vision that Oldham remains the centre of the universe. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions for Mr. Law? No. Right. Thank you, Mr. Law. It's already been moved and seconded. I don't know whether anybody else wants to contribute. Councillor Hartner.
I'd like to commend the officers for suggesting that the Plan 36 replacement trees.
Right. Okay. Councillor Ibrahim. No. Oh, sorry. Councillor David.
Thanks, Chair. No, very quickly. I mean, we've already had a seconder, a first, someone propose it and a seconder, but I think, you know, it's fantastic. It's bringing more facilities to Oldham. Whatever the profits it's going to make, it's going to be put back into good causes. And, you know, Mr. Stroll has come up trumps again, so thank you very much, and I certainly would be back in it.
Thank you. The recommendation is to approve. Are we all in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you. If we go on to if we go on to the item regarding Harewood Drive. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Sorry, yes, yeah, I'm sorry, I thought, yeah. Yeah, 1 and 2 Wade Top, Upper Mill.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application. It's only before committee because the applicant is a council employee. It's for the conversion of 2 cottages into 1 and for some alterations to the front elevation of the building. So this is the property itself, next to a park area. Just to give you it's difficult to see, but this is just to give you an indication of the floor plans as existing and the elevation as existing. This is the proposed elevation. Now this feature, which is obviously slightly at odds with traditional character of the area, but still includes most of the traditional surrounds with the stone surrounds and so forth. It's not particularly prominent. In fact, it's barely prominent at all, which is why you'll find the only picture I've got of it is actually not even of that elevation, but it's showing where the building is set down a traditional alleyway at the back. Unless members have got any particular queries, it's recommended for approval.
Councillor Hudson.
And say it's right behind the bakers, so you wouldn't know it were there unless you went to look for it. So it's causing no problem. I'm amazed, but it's been explained that it's a member of staff, or else it wouldn't even come before us.
Yeah.
So I'll move it.
It's been moved and seconded. Is it everybody, all those in favour? Yeah, thank you. We could then move on to the last item, which is the Airwood Drive one again. It's regarding an employee of the council.
Thank you, Chair. Again, same reason. It's a proposed dormer extension to back of an existing bungalow. There's the bungalow in question. You just see actually next door there already is a larger, in fact a larger dormer than the one proposed in this instance on the adjoining property. This is just showing the layout, so the extra space that will be created within the roof space and an elevation that actually shows the dormer on the back. Again, unless members have got any questions, it's recommended for approval.
Moved and seconded. Are we all agreed? Right, thank you. I think that concludes the meeting, and I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas and very prosperous and good New Year. Sorry, yes, there's one item that I'm trying to get it over with quick. I'm freezing. I don't know about you. Is the appeals, results of the appeals and processes. Are we agreed? Thank you.